So thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you an update on qlog. Next slide. So for those people not familiar with qlog, I'm just going to give a quick summary. The original motivation for this was that we wanted to create visualizations and tools to help debug quick implementations. And we quickly saw that we weren't going to be able to do that just using packet captures or pcap files, because those lack a lot of important information, for example, related to congestion control. Next slide. So we started looking at using the endpoint log formats themselves, so the logs produced by the implementations, but we quickly found out that they are wildly inconsistent. Sometimes even within the same implementation, things are not consistent. So they're not really easy to use. And we said, instead of writing a million different parsers for each implementation, how about everybody would just play nice and use a single standard format, right? So next slide. We proposed such a format called qlog. It's really quite simple. It's just a JSON file in a particular scheme. JSON because it's easy to use in web-based tools, and because it's human readable, so you can use it also without using specialized tools. Next slide. So the idea is that if everybody just outputs the exact same format, it's easy to aggregate this, it's easy to share, and it's also easy to write reusable tools, so that if we write tools, anybody doing anything with QUIC can immediately use them, which is quite nice. So we presented this end of last year in December, and a bit to my surprise, we actually got a lot of enthusiasm about this. A lot of people seemed quite interested. One of these people was Miriam. So next slide. And she said, why would you stop at QUIC? Why not just do the same concept for other protocols as well? And so we got the opportunity to present some of our thoughts on logging last time at the IETF. So that was 3 months ago in Prague, where I talked about some of the things listed here. If you want to see that talk, I've mentioned the YouTube URL on the bottom. Again, plenty of interest, which was nice, but also the feeling that it wasn't ready yet to go to a much broader discussion. So the next steps forward were to flesh it out a bit more and to focus on QUIC as kind of like an initial use case, like an incubator. So that's where we ended off last time, and we've worked with that since. So what we have now, next slide, is basically two documents, two drafts. The first one we're calling the high-level schema, which is kind of like the protocol agnostic part, so the one that should be general purpose. And then the second one, it contains all the QUIC and HTTP specific stuff. The second one is quite easy to understand. In QUIC, you of course have packets. Those things have packet numbers. They are composed out of different frames. If you have a stream frame, it has a length and an offset, and so on and so forth. So it's a really straightforward mapping from the QUIC documents into a JSON format. It's really quite long and it's quite boring, this document. I think the other one, the high-level schema, is a bit more interesting. So next slide. Because this, you can see this as kind of the metadata surrounding the events that you kind of can use to interpret the events or to augment the events, right? So the simplest forms here, as you can see, you can have a title and a description for your file. You can have a bit of configuration. And most importantly, you have what we now have is the protocol type field. It says QUIC HTTP3. This means that all the events following this are to be found in the separate QUIC document. This means that if we ever have documents for other protocols, next slide, we can simply change the protocol type field in the main schema, and then we know where to find the definitions for the events in that part of the file. So that's kind of the general concept that we have at this point, a high-level schema and then individual definitions depending on the protocol. I'm going to give a little bit more detail on both, just to get you an idea of what that looks like. So starting with the high-level schema, next slide. One of the comments previously was JSON is going to be rather large in terms of file size, so we have some things for that. For example, we have the concept of common fields. If every event in the log shares the exact same value for a specific field, you can just declare that once instead of with every event. We also have a limited form of lookup tables, so you can just log indices into those tables instead of the value every time again. We also want to make the format very flexible. For example, we've been working with Facebook, and they feel that they have some very application-specific events only interesting to them. And so it's definitely supported that you can add custom events just for your implementation in the format as well. Another thing that that I really want is that we can aggregate multiple logs into the same qlog file. So let's say, for example, this is here, we have a full end-to-end setup with a single client, a single origin server, and then 2 network-based points as well, in this case 2 servers as well. And you really want to have a full end-to-end view of the full flow across the network. And so if you would do this with normal packet captures, you would have 4 different files, which are difficult to combine and place them into context. So in qlog, I really explicitly wanted to have the option to combine all these 4 different viewpoints, what we are calling vantage points, into the same file. So it's much easier to redistribute or to share with other people, keeping things in the same context. And so another thing that this might enable is logging different protocols in the same qlog file. Let's say that we have an HTTP2 implementation. You might have a separate log for the HTTP2 part of the stack, which is in the user space, and then a second client-side log for the TCP part, which is captured in kernel space, for example. But they can still be combined within the same qlog file. Next slide. And this goes a lot deeper. We were, for example, talking with Jana Iyengar from Fastly, and he said, we're typically going to have thousands of logs at our points of presence. I'm mainly interested in the ones that show, for example, a lot of packet loss, right? So what we have is the concept of a summary node on top of the document that shows some aggregated statistics. So it's very easy to filter which files you might want and which not. Another thing that we have is, again, you want to use visualizations. If you're doing that, you're probably zooming in and you're filtering some data and you're using a specific color scheme, that kind of stuff. Previously, if you wanted to share your very specific view on the data with a colleague, you would probably take a screenshot, right? I don't think that's very optimal. So what you can do in the qlog schema is add some of this tool-specific configuration as well. So you can just share this updated qlog scheme to someone else, and they will have the exact same view of the data for further analysis that you had, which I think is quite powerful. So those are some things in the high-level schema. Let's look at some of the events. Next slide, please. So for QUIC and H3, we currently have about 40 events defined. I think we will end up with somewhere around double that. Most of the most important events, again, for me, are the ones that are not found in the typical packet trace. For example, things related to packet loss. What we have here are congestion control metric updates, things like a new measured round trip time or a congestion window, that kind of stuff. Of course, next to that, we also have the typical packet capture type logs. Next slide. So, of course, QUIC still has packets that it's receiving. We also want to log those. For example, here we have a packet that contains an acknowledgement frame saying that the peer has received indeed packets 4 to 7. The problem we found with just this, so just having like pcap plus a few extra events, is not enough for each use case. This is a good example of that. So we received an acknowledgement for packets 4 to 7. And then sometime later, for some reason, we were getting packet lost events for packets in those acknowledged ranges, right? It's packet number 5. It should have been acknowledged, and apparently it was still detected as lost. So when debugging this, we found that there was like a strange bug in our code where we were parsing and logging the ACKs, but not processing them immediately. In some cases, there was a large delay in actually processing, applying the ACKs. And so there was time for a timer-based packet loss to come up and define the packet as lost. So what we found we needed to do, next slide, is add a more explicit event that actually says we might have received the ACK frame before, but it's only now that it's actually being applied by the implementation. it's easy to see how if you add that kind of explicit event, you quickly get to indeed 70 or 80 events. Now, it's not the idea that every single implementation will have to implement all 80 of those, right? I think most people and most tools will get by with like about 20 for about 90% of the use cases. But for those people who have very explicit use cases who want to go really deep, I think the text should provide a full array of these different events. At least that's the approach that we're taking now. So these are just some examples. I did another talk earlier with a lot more in-depth detail as well. It's linked below on YouTube. If you're really, really interested, you can go and watch that as well. So as you can see, we've made a lot of progress on the text. We've also made a lot of progress on implementation. So next slide, please. I'm very happy that we can say that we now have 5 different implementations that are outputting the qlog format directly. Not all of them are outputting all the events, obviously, most of them doing a subset, but still, it's already quite good. It's even more impressive seeing that we really don't have that many tools available yet. There is one that is mainly being used that you can see here. It's mostly for debugging congestion control issues. But my plan is to work on these tools non-stop for the next couple of months. And we have some things that are almost ready to be made public. So more tools will be coming very, very soon, immediately usable by users of all these different implementations. The nice thing about having other people look at this is that we were able to get a lot of feedback. So next slide. For example, some people say it's the overhead is actually quite okay. It's not as bad as we might have feared. Facebook is even saying we are logging over 20 billion events every day. Full disclosure, I don't think they meant that they're logging qlog events. They also have a separate older tracer in their code. So it's probably those events. But still, I think the takeaway is that you can definitely do logging at scale, which I think is quite encouraging. Someone else said that they would like to use qlog to implement a couple of their unit tests or end-to-end tests. So instead of instrumenting the code with tests, they would just instrument with the logging and then parse the qlogs afterwards to see if, for example, he was talking about the spin bit, to see if the spin bit was actually being flipped, which you can derive from the logs as well. I think it's a very powerful concept, also interesting for automated analysis and verification of quick implementations. The last part, the last sentence really resonated with me, because when we started this, I asked a lot of people, why is no one else doing this? Why are we the first? And a lot of people said, it's usually just too much effort. We don't have the manpower to do this. And I really think that qlog kind of alleviates some of this burden. Next slide. So for example, we recently did research into HTTP tree prioritization, where in this top visualization, each of the rows is a separate web page load. So each of those is a single qlog file. And each of the vertical rectangles are individual QUIC packets. And I really like this visualization because it really shows immediately the differences between these different prioritization schemes, right? And yet it only cost me 1, maybe 2 days to create this visualization based on qlog. And that might still seem a lot, but the bottom one, it shows how the prioritization tree is being built up. This was actually created in a matter of 2 hours by one of our bachelor students who was helping with the implementation of the prioritization scheme. And so I really think qlog, if you have qlog, it enables you to write these quick and dirty tools. They don't have to be user-friendly, but they can make a good visualization to help you see what's going on in a complex system really, really quickly. So that's a lot of positive feedback. We've also gathered something that I like to call constructive feedback. Next slide. So there were some people that said, you know, this is adding a lot of code-based overhead. I'm a bit critical about the 30%. I don't think it's that much, but still, there is some, there might be a problem there. I'm very ashamed to say that our own implementation is actually 50% slower. when full qlogging is enabled. This is probably because we're using JavaScript and a very, very bad logging framework, but still there is a cost, right? There are still people skeptical about using JSON, rather use binary formats, which are also available, of course. And some people also say that depending on the implementation, you might not have all the information in a single place to log the events as I have defined them in the current schema. So some events might have to be redefined or split up into separate things, depending on implementation context. The last one, I think, is a very, very important one. And they said, you know, that there are some implementations holding out on qlog because they say it's not just because the performance overhead, it's also because there is a certain maintenance burden. The moment you add more code like this and something changes in QUIC, you have to spend some time on updating the logging as well. So we'd rather wait until things settle down a bit. I think it's a bit of an ironic statement by someone implementing QUIC, right? But still, I get where it's coming from and how that might be difficult. So some of the implementations that are holding out have found other ways of getting to qlog and to the tools. Next slide. And that is by using what you can call transformers or converters, right? So they log to a certain format, their internal format, and then they have a separate program that takes that and transforms it into qlog. For example, Fastly, Cloudflare, and Microsoft are doing or have at some point done something in this trend. I kind of like the approach. It works. It might be a way of getting browser output into a qlog compatible format eventually, as I don't know if browsers will actually be interested in implementing qlog immediately. So it's interesting, it's workable, but I'm a bit afraid about the maintenance burden of these converters, right? You have to keep them up to date as well, and that may or may not be a problem in the end. So this is pretty much what I had to say. So in conclusion, next slide. I'm of course a bit biased, but I really like the progress that we've been able to make. I really like where we are now and the plans that we have. I really love how many people in the community have helped out with this. Thank you all very much for that. However, there are also, next slide, a lot of open questions that remain. At the end of the last presentation in March, there was a lot of feedback on we need to look at privacy and security aspects. I'm sad to say that that is one of the main aspects that we haven't looked at all that deep yet. One, because I'm not an expert in this, and two, because we've had very little concrete feedback. So if you have ideas on what exactly there is important and how that might be reflected in how we build these schemes, that would be very welcome feedback. Next to that, it looks like this is working for QUIC, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for all the other things as well. So that's a discussion we also, I think, still need to have. Now, I don't want to do all of that right now at the mic, right? So next slide, last slide. I would invite you all to join the discussion. On GitHub, we have a lot of issues. We have a brand new qlog mailing list. Thank you for that, Miria. And I'm also working on quicktools.info, which will list all the available tools for QUIC, not just our own, those of other people in the community as well, to act like a central hub in the future. If you want to do more, you can of course start implementing qlog in your own QUIC implementations or implementations of other protocols, right? So maybe we can have a proof of concept of something running for example, TCP as well by next time. That would be amazing. You can also, of course, do your own visualizations. That would be nice to see. The final thing is the question, does it make sense to make this into a birds of a feather or maybe even a working group? If yes, when? If not, does it make sense at all? Or which questions do you feel still need to be answered to be able to make that decision? All right, and what are the next steps you want to see for this work? So that's all for me. Thank you all for listening, and I am ready for questions. Thank you.